listening to the 14th Source for all geeky and nerdy news and discussion, which means that you're listening to a podcast.
For all intents and purposes.
I am D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And we are your two overeducated, codependent nerd hosts, bringing you the things that we like to talk about, but filtered through an inquisitive and critical lens. In the episode for Friday, January 13th, 2023. Our first episode of the new year.
Yes, because some intruder came on the show.
Well, I mean, it wouldn't have happened if you hadn't guessed that who the winner was going to be for the best podcasting co-host of 2022, but then you ruined all that, so...
I did. Who'd have guessed, all right?
But
that's who
did,
guessed.
Yeah. It was rude and unprofessional. How has your new year been so far? Exciting, wonderful, cold?
You know, like you and I, as you're getting ready to start the new term, I've already started mine because I'm on a quarter system. So I'm starting class, getting into some new programming and computer science. That's fun. Go back to work, trying to clean up the mess that is the first week or two of the term. It's nothing too crazy going on. It's not like California, which I hear is undergoing some wild weather this week.
Yeah. I mean, in December, you guys got the freeze attack, right?
Yeah, we got a big dollop of ice.
January, Northern California down to kind of the Central Coast is just getting slapped with rain and wind specifically.
Which
Yeah, back in our hometown, sort of in the Central Coast, they're getting hit really hard with rain. Up here, we're getting hit hard, mostly with wind, and it's like catastrophic in a lot of senses. So everything from I have friends and acquaintances who have been without power for the last 48 hours, to especially in Sacramento where it's a considerable danger, large old trees falling over, being a combination of years of drought and lots of rain and strong winds.
Well, that's the thing I think about, every time there's a big rain in California, people say, oh, it's great because there's been a drought. It's like, well, okay, or there's been big fires. You're like, yes, but there are consequences to that. And, California, the region that is a lot of California, doesn't handle the jump between the extremes, right?
Right.
Not that anyone handles it, but like this is where you see mudslides, you see,
it's because we're prepared for like gradual increase of water supply, not instant increase of water supply. Like it's funny, I live along the American River where there's a lot of county maintained and city maintained river access points, where they have little parking lots and places where you can pick up vests and go kayaking or swimming around. Those are all closed. And then it isn't until you go over a bridge and you realize, oh, wow, 1, the river is really high. 2, I can't see the parking lot anymore because it's all covered in water, which makes me really appreciative of levee technology, which I guess is really just piling dirt very high. So if you're in a region that's protected by levees, my fingers are crossed for you as well. But if you are in the weather zone here, we hope everything is safe and that you are that everything's secure. And if you're not, I hope you're having a great start to your 2023. Yeah, indeed. And actually, part of the new year is looking back or bringing over dealing with the problems of the old year. And ironically, or coincidentally, I should say, our year-end episode had us looking back on a lot of the good things, the personal things, and some of the bad things that happened in 2022. And one just decided to keep going into 2023, Andrew. And we actually talked about it. Let's talk a little bit more, if you don't mind, about the OGL, the Open Game License, right, and how it pertains to Wizards of the Coast, or specifically Dungeons and Dragons.
Then the reason why we're here to talk about it is because this is a story that just won't quit. And now I will say,
it feels like it's just getting started.
Well, so let's talk about it. Because the reason why I say this should have been put to bed weeks ago, right? And it's turning into a public relations nightmare, at least on social media, right? Twitter, Mastodon is probably, I'm assuming, other places. I know some gaming Discords have actually banned discussions of this issue. Yeah, especially ones that are really close to, like, the D&D Discord has banned it. One of the, like, the semi-official ones. Yeah. The Critical Role Discord has banned it.
Yeah. For legal reasons.
Well, it's just because I've seen Discords where it's over, like, that's all people are talking about. So anyway, what is it? So
let me tell you, as our official representative on Hive, it's pretty quiet. Because no one's on Hive.
Well, I mean, it's funny. There's not a lot of people on Mastodon, but boy, oh boy, they could still light it up. So, the big thing is the open game license, and I have talked about it before. It's been something, an area of interest ever since I was in law school. I spent an undue amount of time researching it and writing about it. I used to blog. I actually
getting some notability about it.
No, not really. I always loved, actually, it's like the one blog post I wrote about the open game license of all the ones I have on my little Blogspot blog or Blogger blog. It has an unusual number of hits, right? Because people find it and they're like, oh, let me read this. But anyway, so the open game license is this thing. It's a license. It's we talk about Creative Commons licensing a lot because we use Creative Commons license. The open game license is similar to that. It's saying, hey, someone has something, a game system, and they want to make it available for others to use in an open fashion. So this happened in 2000. Wizards of the Coast, who had just recently acquired TSR, the company that made Dungeons & Dragons, and they wanted to kind of, in the words of one of the people behind it, Ryan Dancy, they wanted to make sure that D&D never got, like, locked behind bad decisions of a company, or more specifically, like, being lost in it's owned by someone who just wants to bury it, right? They want to make sure that D&D would always kind of live on. So they looked to the open source community for programming, which was still, I think, nascent at the time, but definitely, or not nascent. They were starting to have ideas of open code. So like, let's do the same thing. Open game license. Cool. So Wizards of the Coast created this thing. It's a license. It is not a great license. It's not a clear license, but it's a license that everyone understood what they knew it meant. That you can make stuff using the rule system of the game this is attached to, under some there's some guidance to it, and go ahead and just do it. And it's the only restrictions. Essentially, it's a share alike license. So any open game content that you produce is also something, because you're using the open game license, you make available for others to use as well. Although it's technically only the things you label as open game content, which we can get to that later. Now it's important because historically TSR was litigious. They would
the original owners of
D&D. They were willing to threaten people. They threatened people with lawsuits quite regularly. And I think there was this understanding in the 80s, probably because of Gary Gygax and TSR, that was actually a legitimate business model, right? You can't use my game system because it's mine, and I will sue you into oblivion if you try to.
Which is like, I want to pause right there, because in a sense, that's responsible trademark ownership, but that's where things get hairy here, because I also want to talk about like the trademarkability, the copyrightability of like game systems and rule sets.
So it is for a trademark, it's responsible behavior, and for a patent, it's reasonable to do. For a copyright, it would also be a thing you could do, but you don't have to. Now, it's important to understand, though, that I just mentioned 3 different types of intellectual property, which in the U.S. and most countries that I'm aware of, intellectual property tends to fall into 4 buckets. We're going to focus on 3. The 4th bucket is like trade secrets, so it's not really applicable here. But there's copyright, there's patent, and there's trademark, and they're different. They do different things. There's some overlap, but not a whole lot. And copyright is for works of authorial work, right? They're for stories, for art, for photographs, for dance, for songs, for movable films, motion pictures. It makes sense. They're for these creative expressions. patents are for inventions, for machines, for processes. So if you make a new, or for even like drugs, obviously you hear about drug patents. They're for inventions, for processes. Like if you have one of the ones we always like to talk about in patent classes, someone patented the procedure for training your cat with a laser pointer.
Really?
Right. So some guy filed a patent about how you shine a laser pointer and you exercise your cat.
That's a dick move.
And it's he never did anything with it. He just filed it. Similarly, a local Seattle-based company in 1995 filed a patent for a trading card game, right? Where you buy these trading cards and you build decks and you play a game where you're tapping cards for power that are used to bring other cards into the game to attack your opponent. Wizards of the Coast is the name of the company. So they had a patent for that. Trademark is like your brand, right? That's like Dungeons and Dragons with the logo and everything, or even the name Dungeons and Dragons itself can be a trademark. For example, Domino's Pizza and the logo of the domino, that's a trademark, right? That is how people recognize that, yes, this is my company doing business, right? Obviously, Domino's doesn't want someone called Domino's Pizza selling not, some sort of not aftermarket, but like some sort of, oh, look, we're just selling Totino's pizzas, but calling it Domino's. Right. That kind of thing, right? It's to protect the business so people know that mark is the people that it claims to be. So these are the kind of the three buckets. And so the open game license ostensibly is touching those, is somehow involved with those, right? Yeah, of course. In the open game license says
it's touching many buckets.
It's touching, yeah.
Oh, there's some bucket touching going on here.
And so, but the important thing was, and of course, what I'm alluding to is that actually what D&D mostly the rules of the game mostly would have fallen under a patent, but there is no patent for D&D. In fact, there will never be one at this point. I can't imagine how. I mean, the patent office may approve that patent, but the patent office does not take game patents very seriously, I'm going to say. And I got some saucy talk about that, but just look up the Monopoly patent, look at it for a few minutes, then look up the Landowners game patent filed 30 years earlier. Like, it's good. They don't care. They just stamp those because it's like, whatever, man, you paid the fees. That's what we cared about.
As a person trained in law, but who is not giving out any legal advice, do you think they should be taking it more seriously? Is that something that you think should be more copyrightable, trademarkable?
I mean, the problem is patents are so expensive.
Or patented, sorry. Yeah.
It costs tens of thousands of dollars and years to file a patent. Mm-hmm. And while it gives you a monopoly for up to 20 years, which, if you're building like a new type of battery that's innovative and whatever, that's cool. But game patents are going to be, it would be so difficult because, one of the important things on a patent is that it needs to be basically a new invention, and it has to be not have been released before. And it has to not only be a new invention, it has to be non-obvious to a person skilled in the art. A person of skill in the art, posita. Yeah. So like the idea that it may not be obvious to you, but if it's obvious, like what D&D 5th edition did, maybe not obvious to the casual player, but to someone who's been developing games, nothing they did was innovative, right? Like, these are all mechanics you could have found elsewhere. So that's why like game patents are just tough. And the few times there is something that truly is like innovative, usually it's a small company that can't afford the patent. And there's a good argument to be made as a gaming community. It's not healthy to do that, right?
Actually, yeah, that reminds me of it happened in video games, but years ago they made a game called Shadows. I think Ubisoft made a game called Shadows of Middle Earth. It's like a sort of 3D adventure game, but it had this system called the Nemesis system that people went gaga over. Basically, it's like there's a leader of this group, of this clan or whatever, of orcs that you have to kill, but they created the system that there are basically is a hierarchy that's almost an artificial intelligence that if you take out that leader orc, it changes the dynamic of the group and all that kind of stuff. But like it was something that hadn't really been seen in mainstream video games before, and people were like, "This is like the next thing. This is we're going to see this iterated on and change video games going forward." But it never happened, and it was revealed later. It's like it never happened because Ubisoft patented that Nemesis system, and no one was willing to pay.
Sega patented from Crazy Taxi the idea of an arrow pointing on the screen as to where you had to go.
Yeah.
Right. Things that like it's I think in gaming they tend to be very silly because gaming is such a short-term industry that like the idea that like you've got a lock on this system is like, well, it's like, okay, unless you exploit it a lot.
Right.
It's really, I feel like, for at least from my perspective, someone who's in gaming, I find that general gaming patents I don't think are actually beneficial to the community.
Right.
If not, and this is actually one where I'd almost recommend some sort of alternative. I think, attribution systems are probably more valuable, and maybe like some sort of, a system for like, I don't know, acknowledging and help. But I think a lot of the guys that do invent these things do get, like, when you think about in tabletop games, in card games, in board games, Dominion came out in 2008, I believe it was, and it was what's called a card drafting game. And at the time, this kind of game, there was no game like it. It was innovative. It truly was the kind of thing where it's the first of its kind, at least that I've ever seen. I think most people agree. But within 6 months, there were other games based on that out there. Now, did Dominion suffer at market because of it? I would actually say it's still around. They're still making expansions, so I'd say no.
Right.
But the genre definitely permutated. Other people experimented with it. Other people made games based on this mechanic. And I think as a whole, the board game industry benefited. Now, is Donald X. Vaccarino or Rio Grande Games, should they have gotten more from it? I mean, I feel like had they patented it, all that would have happened was it would have sat there, or maybe people would have, made those knockoffs or those games using that mechanic, and maybe they'd get sued. But again, bringing lawsuits is expensive. And when you look at the way these patents work, there's surprising wiggle room with some of these things of like, well, no, I'm not doing that. I'm doing this. Right? Wizards of the Coast had a patent on Magic the Gathering, on a tradable, collectible card game, yet the late 90s was inundated with these things. Some of them that were remarkably similar, right? So it is like, well, what did that really get you? So anyway, so there's some background. I think the takeaway, and we have an article by an attorney at the Electronic Frontier Foundation that we'll put in the show notes, where she actually discusses some of this about how actually probably it's not very clear if this was something that was even licensable. But in any case, Wizards of the Coast licensed the open game license, or created the open game license, and they licensed the mechanics of D&D 3rd edition for everyone to use. Fast forward in 2008, they tried to unlicense it by creating the game system license for 4th edition. It was very well regarded. No, it was very poorly regarded. It actually probably caused more damage to the kind of the dominion that they had. It's actually what directly led to the rise of Paizo as a second party, because Paizo said, well, we're not going to do your game system license. We're just going to keep making a game based on the previous one, the 3rd edition open game license. So it was kind of, in a lot of third-party developers, like, we're not going to do it because your game system license is kind of exploitive. You're asking us to like report all of our sales. You're asking us to pay money. Things that we didn't have to do before, and arguably we don't have to do. So that didn't really go over well. Fast forward to 2014 or so, Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition comes out, and they say, ha ha ha, we're going back to the open game license. Hooray! So there's been a massive proliferation of games based on the 5th edition rule set. And all people have to do is slap this license at the end of their rule book, acknowledge that, yeah, they got some stuff from Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, and move on.
So it's basically an attribution system, it sounds like, at this point. Where it's just, you have to pay a license fee.
There's no licensing fee, but there's a share-alike component where anything that you designate as this open game content is shareable, so other people can use it. Although you don't actually see that necessarily that much. You do see a lot of attribution and a lot of whatever else. So anyway, now we fast forward to, and we talked about this in December. Wizards of the Coast had announced, they were very excited that D&D was under-monetized, and they wanted to find ways around that. And then there's this discussion of, the rumor is that they're going to stop using the open game license. And as we discussed in December, D&D Beyond Twitter account, or maybe it was a forum posting, they came in and said, oh, no, we're going to use the open game license, you silly goose. There are going to be some changes, though. And they highlighted some changes, including some, to limit what kind of things could be used with it, to make people that make over a certain amount of money have to pay royalties. And they kind of left it at that, and people were not super enthused with what they said, but it seems like, okay, well, we'll see what you come out with. However, since then, things got a little bit weird. In early January, a writer for Gizmodo, Linda Codega, published an article about they had a draft of they had the copy of the OGL 1.1 that allegedly Wizards was circulating. And they said, oh boy, it's not good. Because one of the things about the open game license, among other things, so, there's a lot to talk about. But paying the royalties, making people report every sale they did, dividing the license into a commercial and non-commercial version. So here's the non-commercial license for if you don't sell it. Right, but if you sell it, you gotta do all these extra things. Okay. Another aspect that they previously always said, hey, even if we change the open game license, the previous stuff that was published under those previous versions, those were still good. Now they're saying actually that old license no longer good. Now it's not clear what that means, but the interpretation a lot of people were walking away from is that they're trying to basically unwind all of the previous 20 years of you could do this, right? They want to say, no, you can't do this unless you do it with this new putative license we've created. And there's some other stuff in there. And the idea is that people took this article by Linda Codega, and also a few third-party publishers, including Roll for Combat / Battle Zoo Bestiary, who is a company that I think they'd mostly been doing Pathfinder 2nd edition content, but they were also doing 5th edition content. And I don't know if the owner of the company is just brazen, but he actually started making videos saying well, let's look at this horse shit. Right. He really kind of lit that up. And then from there, it's been snowballing. And it's been snowballing through most of January. And I will say at the time of this recording, oh boy, Wizards of the Coast has not responded.
And they still haven't officially released it.
They have not officially released it, but they've also not denied anything. Right. The one thing they did say is the D&D Beyond Twitter did tweet on Tuesday, January 10th, saying, gosh, we know you're all talking about this. We'll have more to say in the future.
Right, that's the D&D Beyond account, not even the official WotC account.
Well, it's owned by remember D&D Beyond is owned by Wizards of the Coast.
Right. But I don't know.
But not the Wizards D&D Twitter. Now, I'll say though the reason I mentioned is because D&D Beyond was the one that also responded in December saying, we're still going to use the OGL. It's just going to be a little bit different. So it seems to be that's the mouthpiece that is talking about this stuff. So it's been kind of a big news cycle for Wizards of the Coast. Months before the premiere of their great cinematic adventure, D&D Honor Among Thieves, they've dropped this bombshell on the player base, and I guess it's just kind of wild because it's one of these things where I think from my perspective, I've talked about some of my multiple times about some of my legal issues, but at this point it's like watching a
issues
PR
with
nightmare.
The legal side of it, not your legal issues.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but the legal side of it, I don't remember. Just my legal perspectives, which are whatever they are. The idea of watching this where it starts, and at first you could see people especially a month ago when the first discussion started happening. A lot of people are saying, no, this is obviously not true. Wizards wouldn't do that, And then to see people kind of start peeling off, especially as D&D Beyond responded saying, oh no, we're staying with this, but we're going to do it a little bit differently than we talked about. And some people started to say oh, see, I told you they would never give up on the open game license. And then some people are saying, wait, what do you mean it's going to be different? Right. And then when the leak happened, people started saying, there's some people said, oh, come on, guys, this can't be real. That's not what a contract looks like. Right? Oh, someone like Wizards wouldn't write such a bad contract. And then as it becomes more obvious that it probably is real, people are you see more and more people just well, shit. And all the time, Wizards isn't saying anything. No denials, no, hey, they finally got to, hey, we'll talk about this later.
Right. Honestly, it makes sense to talk about it once they actually release it. Maybe. Like, I think that the other interesting side of this, and we were talking about this off mic, but this seems to be specifically targeting the fact, well, I think we should also explain the context here. Like, D&D is probably, despite the fact that they say they're not monetizing it enough, it's kind of bigger than ever, right? We got a movie coming out. We have humongous entertainment properties that are making probably millions of dollars, right? We have that, and so I think less...
A TV series was just announced for Paramount Plus.
So they're not necessarily saying we aren't making enough money. It's more like we see other people making money. We should have some of that money. That's kind of what I'm gleaning off of it. I'm thinking of things like Critical Role and another. Well, Critical Role for me, if one understands, is like the biggest one out there. But,
yes, Critical Role is the elephant in that room.
And for those who don't know, what is Critical Role? It's basically,
Critical Role is a what do they call it? A let's play? No, not a let's play. A live.
No,
play?
It's
an actual play.
Actual play. There we go. Yeah.
It's people, voice actors, playing D&D together on the TV. Or on Twitch,
where
on
the internet,
basically they do I think it's every Thursday or so, where it's just them playing, but it's apparently so popular that people they tune in regularly for 4 hours of watching people play D&D.
I have close friends that do that.
Yeah, it's a huge, they're on their third ongoing story, of which each one is like hundreds of episodes, right?
And they have merchandise, they have comic books,
they have two official D&D source books, one unofficial D&D source book, right? They've got, they have an animated series on, is it Amazon Prime, I believe?
Probably.
They've got, it's huge, right? So now when they announced that they were going to start extracting royalties from certain people, they said, this only affects 20 or so people, 20 or so publishers. And it's like, okay, but, right, what does that mean? Like, okay, so we're going to shake you guys down.
Right.
One of the things it includes is if you do a Kickstarter, there's language where they want, if you do a crowdfunding, they want 25%. If you do a Kickstarter, they only want 20% because Kickstarter is their preferred crowdfunding program platform. And Kickstarter acknowledged, yes, they did negotiate this with us.
Really? Wow.
So it is just this idea that they want to take this money from these third party producers, and people have done the math, and it's like it can't be that much. This is not like it's like if you're trying to become the $1 billion property that you say you want to be, you just got 1% of the way closer. It's like you're creating a lot of animus really to extract crumbs from Tiny Tim, you're like it is this real Scrooge energy of like, hey man, I'm gonna beat up Tiny Tim for his lunch money because that'll make me even more money.
It's like a privatized IRS, tell how much did you make this year, and we'll determine how much you need to pay. Basically.
And I think one of the things that some of the reporting requirements are kind of, like if you sell anything, you have to report it all to Wizards, which that's kind of onerous, right? Like,
a little bit, since you are not a government entity, right?
And I think it goes back to what you were licensing to me to begin with was already kind of shaky. Like where the details of where the line is unclear. A lot of intellectual property attorneys agree. Most of this is not actually something they could copyright, and since they don't have a patent, you're kind of up the creek, right? The worst they can do is threaten to sue you, which that is a very legitimate threat. Don't get me wrong. When $1 billion would-be industry Wizards of the Coast or industry Wizards of the Coast comes and sues me, guy who makes $5,000 a year selling D&D monsters or some shit, like that's enough to send me to the poorhouse.
But again, assuming they're not necessarily aiming for the small guy, but it affects everybody on a certain level that actually want to make money off of their creative endeavors.
One of the other notable changes is that the license now only extends to rulebooks and static PDFs, right? They say like, no, we didn't mean any of these other things. Video games,
really,
whatever. It's like, so every actual play on the internet is no longer like they technically, if you think that Wizards could control the rules mechanics and that you needed the OGL to do this actual play, they're saying you can no longer do that. They're telling you, which includes Critical Role. Although let's be honest, Critical Role would negotiate their own contract if they haven't already.
They already have a relationship with them. It sounds
right.
Like, so.
But it's this idea of saying we're basically telling you can't do this.
Right. It kind of excludes a successor to a Critical Role from coming up, right?
Without their permission.
Exactly, right? And yeah. This, and as we're kind of talking about, this could upset a lot of businesses. Have you heard of any companies out there that have already talked about how they're going to deal with this, how they're going to sort of swerve around this, how they're going to sort of keep their business alive without having to pay this devil piper?
Companies all over the place are because Wizards of the Coast has not said anything.
Right.
Again,
that's the
time of this recording.
Oh,
there are a lot of companies that have actually said we were like so Foundry Virtual Tabletop, which is a Bellevue, Washington-based company that makes a virtual tabletop, of which, you know, although it supports any system as long as someone creates the framework for it. I think they know like 60% of their user base is playing 5th edition D&D.
Right. This is is this the virtual tabletop you use?
Yes, I do. But they've actually
said, full
like,
disclosure. Oh,
well, they've actually said because they're specifically excluded from the open game licensed 1.1, right? Because they're a virtual tabletop. They're not a rule book or a static PDF. Okay. Because remember, Wizards of the Coast wants to release their own virtual tabletop, and they've worked out a licensing agreement with Roll20 and I believe Fantasy Grounds, right? So it's like this is another one of those situations where they're trying to exert control over this. Once you get to something like Foundry, it really much more clearly becomes a patent issue because we're now talking about, you know. But anyway, we're literally talking about procedures, computer procedures. But anyway, so Foundry actually has said like we've reached out to Wizards because we're not comfortable with this. Like we're concerned. Matt Colville, who owns MCDM, which is they publish a monthly magazine called Arcadia. They've had two or three of the largest D&D 5th edition Kickstarters, strongholds and followers and some other shit.
These are books, right?
They're books. They're books with PDFs. And he has already said, because they have a monster book coming out, their company has said, after consulting with counsel, we're not concerned about our current project and we have nothing further to say at this time.
So let me just make clear, like these books
I'm
are
not
coming
done.
up. Sorry.
Hold your horses.
Yes, sir.
Several small-time publishers, including Schwalbe Entertainment. I forgot one of the other ones. I know Schwalbe Entertainment is it's small. He used to work on D&D. Robert Schwalbe. It's basically one guy. He now does a game called Shadow of the Demon Lord, but he has some 5th edition products. And he said he basically posted a fire sale on Drive-Thru-RPG. Everything is 66.6% off. To keeping with his Demon Lord theme. But and he said that they will all come down permanently on, I believe, Friday. So at the time this is recorded, he may have already pulled his products from Drive-Thru-RPG. Kobold Press, which this is one I wanted to get to, which is one of the biggest D20 publishers, D&D derivative publishers in the business, other than like say Paizo, a company that's so respected that Wizards of the Coast contracted him to write two of the big first adventures for 5th edition.
Really?
Horde of the Dragon Queen, like two of the first published adventures you could buy for D&D 5th edition with the Wizards and D&D logo were written by Kobold Press. As of January 9th or 10th, Kobold Press has announced that they're just going to make their own open game system. And that's what they're going to start doing.
Oh, geez. Wow. Okay.
That this is their perspective is that this is not like a safe environment for them to work in.
Well, stuff like that makes me worried. Well, I guess it comes down to being a copyright or I guess trademark issue, because you think of like derivative works, right? Can WotC go after them, going like, well, I mean, this is clearly an iteration yeah. That's a different story, perhaps.
Well, and that's actually, there's some really interesting thing about that, because you think about that, like, well, can they say that this is similar enough to D&D? And I'd argue no, because they're talking about mechanics.
Yeah.
One of my favorites in doing research for this, I learned about two, let's call them offshoot D&D products. Right. One is called Osric, which is old school Renaissance IC. I forgot what the IC stands for. Mm-hmm. It is basically someone rewrote Advanced Dungeons & Dragons First Edition. Mm-hmm. But they officially did it under the OGL 1.0, which the OGL 1.0 that they're referencing references the 3rd edition. So they used it as this bizarro cover, and then basically rewrote 1st edition Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, for which it was not under an open license. And I thought, like, boy, that's funny. And it's a burgeoning, there's a very niche community that then writes products for this rule set, basically for 1st edition AD&D. Another company, very similar, I forget the name of the company, Basic Fantasy Role-Playing Game. The exact same concept, but instead of 1st edition AD&D, it is 1981 Basic D&D, which is because they had separate product lines in the 80s. So again, if you open up Basic Fantasy Role-Playing Game and you it's the same as what we call BECMI, which is Basic Expert Companion Master Immortal. It's a line of D&D rulebooks that came out in the 80s. And they just basically rewrote it all, same rules, and they have it available, and people make supplements for that. So it's this idea that you say, well, if someone does that, can wizards come after them? There's a lot of people they need to come after, because it's become like a market of people making derivative rule sets based on the ones that they liked. You know, they liked 1st edition, they liked whatever, so they rewrote it and then put it out for the community to develop off of.
Yeah, jeez.
It's like a safe harbor kind of thing. Like, oh no, you're not writing for D&D, you're writing for Basic Fantasy Role-Playing Game.
I want to kind of just make clear the scope of a lot of these sort of third-party creations, like people kickstarting or publishing and or publishing books. Like, are a lot of these books, I'm assuming they're all like original ideas and properties. They're not like based in D&D settings or using D&D characters. Like, it's like they're just using the system to tell their own story, create their own world, right?
Right. So, good example, Green Ronin Publishing, which is a Seattle-based outfit. They do some 5th edition products, and theirs are all they're set in their world of Freeport. So it's there are some new rule mechanics, but it's mostly, hey, we translated our setting to D&D 5th edition for you.
Right.
So if you want to play our setting, but with the system another good example, there's Cubicle 7, a British publisher, released a game called Doctors and Daleks, right? Which is a re-instance of their Doctor Who role-playing game using the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons rule set with some modifications. But again, it's not Forgotten Realms, it's not Dragonlance, it's Doctor Who.
It's BBC.
But using the 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons rule set. This is someone technically that Wizards wants to extract. I mean, if you believe their license, they want to take 20% of their sales.
Yeah, yeah.
From the BBC.
Right. That's totally going to happen. And remember, I bring that up also because one of the tweets I saw was from Sinopa Publishing. I don't know if you're familiar with them at all, but they highlighted a specific part of this leaked license that kind of scared me, especially when you're using you're using the system, but you're using it to tell original stories. And the piece they highlighted was you own the new and original content you create, but you agree to give us a non-exclusive, perpetual, irrevocable, worldwide, sub-licensable, royalty-free license to use that content for any purpose. And like, that seems a bit much. To me, the thing that came to mind was like, it sounds like Microsoft all of a sudden going like, hey, anything you've written using Microsoft Word, we can use it for whatever we want. Your 6th grade history paper to the novel you wrote, right? That kind of seems insane.
Well, and I when I first read that, my brain only focused on game mechanics, which I was like, oh, this is you acknowledging on your side that game mechanics can't be protected while then trying to protect them on their side, right? Like, it's you taking what you can take but not giving what you're supposed to give. However, I see some people are looking at that as any content, right? So if you create your whole fantasy world or whatever, which creates, I mean, I don't know. You got to
define content, and maybe that's missing that context from the larger document. But it's still scary on its own.
Yeah, and it is this, it is this troubling thing, because it does feel like it's a grab. Like they want to grab whatever they can grab, no matter the cost. And I think the response from people, I mean, I do love when D&D Beyond tweeted, "Hey, we'll get back to you on this." Every response to it, like, they're all just people like, "Oh, we don't need you." Like, it's like, we don't need your fucking response. Take the shit, you know.
It's as good as them saying like, "Hey, yeah, you know, we're looking into this.
We'll find the guy that leaked that and we'll have him sacked."
You know what? We'll get in touch with you in 3 to 4 business weeks.
And it's, now, the one thing I will say, and I think this is, having had conversations with a lot of different people about this through Discord and stuff. I mean, I do think part of it, there are two things at the core. One is this general misconception of intellectual property. Like, even if you go with the presumption that there is something for wizards to protect, it's still a very gray area that there's case law in support of it not being protectable. And I think people don't like that, because at its core, what that says is if you spend hundreds of hours developing a cool rule system for a game, there's nothing you can do. Like, the minute you publish it, it belongs to the world. That is not, like, I don't think people like to hear that, because that's like, well, then why do I bother, right? Why do I bother creating new mechanics? To which I'd say, I don't know. Why does Kevin McLeod make thousands of hours of music and just throw it into the ether?
Similarly, why does Connor McLeod, who won the prize, still need to fight immortals in subsequent sequels?
Right. So I think it is a difficult thing to face. You know, and people say, oh, well, wizards should get what they deserve for their work. Which, you know, that's always a fair thing to say.
Sure.
Although there's a question of what is it they deserve, you know?
Right.
And have they already received what they deserved for that work, you know? Right. I mean, the big thing, I think, when you think about the D&D movie and the novels they used to write, I don't know if they still do, the TV series they're producing, the minis that they create in partnership with WizKids, all the actual creative, the art and everything. Like, they have a lot of stuff there, right? People love the Forgotten Realms. That is a copyrightable thing that they control. Yeah. People are interested in Dragonlance. Hell, they've got new Dragonlance novels coming out. They've got Eberron is popular. Dark Sun is popular. Spelljammer was popular enough to get a goddamn republish, you know? So the creative things, the actual, like, the art and the mythology and the worlds they build are important. And the mechanics, honestly, the fact that there's been 6 or 7 different editions of D&D, one could argue that those are actually less important.
Right. Does the D&D that you're playing now look anything like D&D First Edition? Right? I mean,
yeah, they both play. You could play Dragonlance in both of them, right? Right. And honestly, and I think also, not to, and again, as someone who tries to design stuff on my own, like, not to disrespect them, but I actually don't think the design work that went into 5th edition is actually that impressive. They actually kind of leaned back on old stuff a lot and had a few innovations, and then kind of just, like, have been riding the wave, you know. And then let's be honest, like, it's one of those things, like, once you've done a lot of stuff, like, it's easy to, like, tweak, you know, like, oh, look, we added a new thing that does cool laser beams. Oh, great. Oh, that didn't work so great. We'll tweak it a little bit more, you know.
Right.
So I do think that and this is very critical of me, and people can disagree with me, I don't think the design work that they did, the actual mechanics that people think maybe they deserve something for, like, whatever they've gotten was far more than they deserve for that. Okay. I think the real value they have is this actual intellectual property, these creative worlds, the fiction. Because that's in the art, the fiction, right. The art, right? People love that shit. I love that shit.
Right.
So but the idea that there's someone in corporate who's like, you know, what would be great? What if we just set this house on fire and see what happens? You know?
I mean, it all started with them using someone else's art in their movie poster.
I mean, this is like, yeah, that circle's coming around, isn't it? No. But it is, I think, it is a stressful time, though, because of some of the language they use about how the old license is no longer valid.
Right.
People are like, what does that mean? Right. Does it mean that, 20 years of open license is now just set ablaze? And what's it mean for people like Green Ronin Publishing, whose superhero role-playing game Mutants and Masterminds was technically built off of a very loose interpretation of the 3rd edition D&D, or Pathfinder, whose whole business was built on that. even though like you'd be hard pressed to see the connection now, they, out of respect, were still including that reference because they say, oh, there's enough here that we need to like still connect it to where we came from. I mean, honestly, if I were Paizo's attorney, I'd be like, well, just cut the shit out. Cut the OGL just out, or cut any reference to D&D out, because it's clear that they want you. They will eat you if they can. Right. So I don't know. It is wild, right? Virtual tabletops freaking out. Third-party publishers announcing they're giving up on D&D. Cats and dogs living together. It's mass hysteria, right?
Well, I'm sorry. That sounds like no fun.
I mean, for me, it's just like part of me just because and the people who have been listening to this for a while know, like, I've always thought the OGL was a big sack of shit. I mean, I quoted an attorney years ago who said it's a license to breathe.
Right.
And the idea that there have been people who know like this is crap, and even there are even some attorneys who say like it's probably crap, but at least it gives you freedom from lawsuit.
Right.
It's just now is that freedom from a lawsuit worth the price they're making you pay?
Right. Well, like Cassandra and Troy, I guess you were. No one believed you, and
I love though, man. They're digging people up. Like I said, Ryan Dancy, one of the original artists, one of the original creators of the idea, has actually been doing interviews saying like, no, this is absolutely not what we intended. Right?
No.
Like this was the whole point. Was it was supposed to be that as an open game license user, you are safe from this exact behavior. I think Monty Cook has said something similar as one of the guys who was there when they did it. I wouldn't be surprised if Jonathan Tweet has also chimed in, because these were the guys that were all there in 2000 who said like, oh, this is what we're going to do. I'd say they could interview Skip Williams, but I hear he like retired to a farm. Well, those are the three developers of the original 3rd edition D&D.
I see. Well, I mean, speaking of attribution, the one thing that we seem to have completely forgotten is if I'm not mistaken, we've just done a hot minute of nerd law. Cue the music, everybody.
Nerd law, nerd law, nerd law, nerd law. You can count that Andrew is on the case, getting legal anytime and in any place with this nerd law, nerd law, nerd law, nerd law. Help out the people at any price, but it's not giving out any legal advice with this nerd law, nerd law, nerd law, nerd law, nerd law.
There we go.
Oh my God, I can't believe I forgot that. In fact, I can't believe I forgot that, because I had told you when we were planning this episode, it's a nerd law episode. By the way, that nerd law theme written by D. Bethel.
Yep. Under the open awesome license.
I'm sorry. The open awesome license. What is this license? It licenses the awesome.
Yep.
But that's it. It's something a Wizards of the Coast attorney wrote. We license the awesome content. Everything else we retain in our ownership.
That explains me to a T.
So, yeah. Now, I do want to say, as we kind of are wrapping this up, this is one of the few times I'm going to reveal the sausage making. This was recorded on Tuesday, January 10th. It would not surprise me by the time this comes to you as a listener on January 13th that Wizards has responded. But boy, oh boy, if they haven't responded by now, geek. like it's been a hot 2 weeks. So
when was that D&D tweet sent out? Today. Okay. So.
Yeah, the D&D, the response of "we'll get back to you" was on January 10th, Tuesday.
So the only thing I would maybe ask is, should we have a disclosure saying, I mean, probably not, no one cares about us anyway, but like that we are friends with someone that works at WotC, but we have not consulted nor gotten any information from them?
Yes. So we are friends with someone that works at WotC, in fact, and also I know a few other people, or have interacted with a few other people that work at WotC. We've not interacted with any of them about this. In fact, I will admit I feel bad that one of our friends from WotC, we've not been talking to this person. I feel because it's like, oh, what do we say? Like, I don't want to say like, how's work? Unrelated department, but it's still the idea of like, how do you talk to your friend when your friend works in the one house and the other house is busy setting the place on fire?
Right. So it's like, so your uncle got out of jail, huh?
So we've not. This is all just fresh bad opinions.
What we're getting from the internet. We have no extra information
any
here.
Good news research team, we just Googled it.
We do our due diligence.
With this kind of quality, we could write for the New York Times.
Oh. So, if you, dear listeners, have any thoughts about the topics we discussed this week, feel free to leave your thoughts as comments on the page for this episode at forallintents.net.
You can also post your comments or engage in conversations with other listeners on our Facebook page.
And you can find us on various social media, which means you can find me on Instagram primarily, which means you can find me at Bethel Comics. And you can find Andrew at Mastodon. Where? I should learn this.
Profound Dark at dice.camp.
Should be easy enough to remember. I should write that down.
Well, it's the same front end. It's just the dice.camp is the instance I'm on, which is now anyone that's listened to this whole conversation, like when I say, "Oh, everyone on Mastodon's talking about this." Yes,
I'm on that server.
I'm on a tabletop tabletop gaming instance. So yeah, everything I'm seeing is about
exploding over there.
It's exploding. Yeah,
it's weird on my cooking Discord server. It's pretty quiet.
Oh, while you're at our website at forallintents.net, you can also take a click on a link in the corner that says YouTube, and there you'll get to our YouTube page, which is actually, we do doublecast. We do repeat the podcast. We post it up there. And actually, I'd say, apparently, ever since you did the con artists, we've had a lot of new followers that I assume are there for Kyron.
Well, he isn't the award-winning co-host.
Yeah. But if you do go there, feel free to like and subscribe, or as they say, ring the bell.
We use 2 tracks of music for our show. One is called Disco Medusae, the other is called District 4. And they're both written and performed by Kevin McLeod of the Clan McLeod, immortal swordsman, graph paper enthusiast, and musician extraordinaire.
You can find his music at incompetech.filmmusic.io, and that's all licensed under the Creative Commons 4.0 Attribution License. Take a fucking hint, Watsy.
Oh, man. If you like the show and like to help us out, the best way to do so would be to subscribe to the show using whichever podcasting service you happen to use. What would help us out even more, though, would be to go to their storefront and leaving some sort of review. Whether a text review or using their proprietary metric will help spread the word to new potential listeners through the magic of algorithms.
It is. I will say the one thing that has just been wild, though, is to see like people scrambling to find new tabletop role-playing games to play. Like people are like, well, I was playing D&D, but man, fuck that company, I'm going to play anything else.
So it's just the Twitter meltdown all over again.
Yeah, but it's a D&D meltdown.
More fun, perhaps, because you get to play games, right?
Yeah, and one thing I always say is I'm excited because there's a lot of people that are going to go just try different games, right? They're going to play new games, and they may find out, actually, I like this other game better than what we were playing anyway.
And you've talked about a lot of amazing, interesting games over the years on this very show. So scrub our archives. It'll take a while too.
Do I talk about that many TTRPGs? Who knows?
I'm not gonna. This isn't a quiz, Dan. I'll have to prove that I know what I'm talking about.
Excellent.
So until you know what you're talking about, dear listeners, I'm D. Bethel.
And I'm Andrew Asplund.
And for all intents and purposes,
that was a podcast.
In the computer, life is crazy, ones and zeros, binary life.
Binary. Nerd law.